And that is the news that Apple is going to allow you to repair your iOS devices yourself. And they are officially going to provide guides and parts for that. It's not yet clear how that will be done in detail, how the official procedures will be for that. But it's important to note that it's at face value a very good step, because right to repair is something that is talked about a lot at the moment. In the US, there is a huge legislative push to allow right to repair, and thereby force companies to allow it. And several news outlets have reported, and commentators have also talked about that this push from Apple, it's nice to see, but the problem is it's not really from their it's not coming from their own hearts, basically, because there has been a motion by shareholders from Apple that basically forced the company to do something in that regard. And there is also some legislation that could have been triggered if Apple would not change its way how things are handled in the repairability department. And yeah, so it will be interesting to see what the implementation of this self-service program will be, since you can on paper offer this program, but the difficulty will be that the terms that are bound to using that program. I don't know who reported that, but a former technician who did work for Apple mentioned that there were so hard constraints for technicians in the past that becoming a certified technician was very hard, and the conditions how you had to handle the parts and send them back, the defective parts, so you could not harvest parts or try to repair them yourself, and so on. So very strict regulations, and that will be interesting to see how this is handled in this case, because you can, even if you provide this service, you can make it very expensive for the end user to actually use that service, because at the moment, especially I think for iPhones or iPads, Apple doesn't do really repairs in their own stores. They are basically doing one-to-one replacements. That happened, for example, to me a few years back myself. I bought I think it was a 2016 iPad Pro, and it had a lamination issue where there was a bubble in the display. And instead of replacing the display, when I went to the Genius Bar in our local Apple store, the answer was, we're not repairing it because it's basically completely glued together. And I walked out of that Apple store the same day with basically a new device. And that's not really eco-friendly. I feel just doing one by one replacements, and um, I don't know what happened with those devices afterwards. So if they are really refurbished, or if they're just chucked away and um, perhaps recycled into their bare components for recycling or something. I don't know that. So will be interesting to see how this change from Apple's policy will affect the whole service and repair situation in the future. Something that is definitely to mention in that regard is you're already seeing also in the product design from Apple changes where they are improving in that department. For example, the new MacBook Pros that came out in October, they don't have batteries anymore that are welded to the cases. I had a swollen battery in my former MacBook Pro, and basically the Apple Store had to completely tear apart the device and swap the whole top cover of the notebook, including keyboard, trackpad, and the battery cells, in order to repair the battery. And especially since batteries are volatile parts, that can be quite cost prohibitive, and that is not necessary anymore with the new models, where you have like in many modern smartphones, you have those elastic pull tabs under the batteries, where you can just pull that tab, and basically you're just pulling the glue away under the battery. And those are now in the new MacBook Pros, so you don't have to recycle the top cases anymore when you need to change the battery. But of course, everything else on these devices is now soldered to the logic board, so you don't have any swappable memory, you don't have any swappable SSDs, and that in itself has concerns in regards to longevity, reliability, and but it's a conundrum. I actually thought about that earlier today, because when you think back, the development of basically computer systems in the past 20 years, you can say, when you're getting higher performance, or when you want to get higher performance, you have to at some point tighten the integration. I think the last big step before the current SoC movement, like we have it with the M1 Max, was in the early or mid 2000s, where at that point you had, when you had a computer motherboard, you had on that not only a CPU, but you had a so-called North Bridge and a so-called South Bridge. And I think it was when Intel transitioned away from the Pentium branding to the Core branding, with the Core Duo and the Core 2 Duo, where they made the step of basically integrating the function, most of the functionality that was located on the Northbridge side of the motherboard chipset into the CPU, which included the memory controller, parts of the expansion I/O for PCI Express, even some USB functionality, And basically, then the only thing that remained as a separate chip was more or less the former Southbridge functionality, which is now known to everyone who's familiar with computers today as just the chipset. So there is no North or Southbridge anymore. It's just a chipset. And now with concepts like the new Apple CPUs, you now see integrations of the memory itself into the processor, which allows you much more control and efficiency on that end. So it's a conundrum where you have to figure out for yourself what's more important for you. Is it in the end performance and efficiency, or is it maintainability and repairability? And I think that's a discussion that we're going to have in the next few years, especially due to these very high integrations. In the Apple space, a lot of people are currently asking themselves, how will Apple do it with the upcoming professional focused iMacs and the Mac Pro that will also run on the Apple Silicon architecture? Because what we're doing in the past with those systems, with upgrading the memory yourself, upgrading storage yourself, and so on, if you apply the concepts from the current M1 chips on those desktop systems, those things will not work anymore. So, will be interesting to see.